Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. We're pleased to invite you and welcome you really to this 4C Risk webinar on third-party management and AI, why we need it. First of all, two things. This webinar is being recorded and we'll provide a link for you next week. Secondly, we encourage you to post questions on the chat box below, where our panelists will answer them at the end of the session. I'll be monitoring that. My name is Yo McDonald, and I'm part of the team here at 4C Risk. Good. So let's just move on now to our learning objectives. Our wish, our hope, our real goal for you at the end of this session is to really understand the challenges TPRM teams face, whether it's preparing for vendor risk assessment, looking at the amount of time that it takes you to assess them against a document like a SOC 2, or even review them against the controls that you have that are part of your organization. We're going to deep dive into use cases and get a sense of how AI is really helping teams really shorten the time frame and get more accuracy. So we're going to support that with a demonstration so that you can actually see 4C Risk products in action doing this, and that will help you understand what the benefits are. So hopefully we'll achieve all those objectives. At the end of the webinar, there's a survey and you can tell us if we've made the mark. Let's introduce our esteemed panelists. We have, first of all, Mike Rasmussen, GRC 2020 founder, also known as the GRC pundit and analyst. He is well known for not only GRC topics, but TPRM best practice workshops all over the world. Many of you know Michael and have seen him on webinars on many topics over the last 20 years. Tom Garuba, cyber and third-party management executive at Flagstar, has decades of experience running these programs at various companies, and many of you may know him from his TPRM tidbits, which are 5-minute videos on LinkedIn, very addictive. Supra Apakonda, who is our co-founder and COO at 4C Risk, has many decades of experience implementing risk programs, including third-party management programs and solutions at all sorts of companies around the world. And our moderator, finally, Susan Palm, Chief Revenue Officer at 4C Risk, who managed programs for third-party management at both Wells Fargo and Sterling Savings Bank. So over to Susan.
Thanks so much, Yo. Very excited to get started, and we're going to share a screen with you on some of the challenges that have been identified by a couple of leading analysts out there. But it's really not a surprise to any of us that these challenges are existing and continue to grow. We're going to talk a little bit about these challenges and dive down into a few of them, particularly certainly around this hyper-connectedness, visibility, and maintaining really resiliency in your operations across your third parties, especially when you're reliant on so many third parties. Risk quantification and prioritization in an AI world. How is AI really flipping things upside down? And then the compliance and regulatory requirements, not just those that exist, but what do we anticipate in an AI world and what's emerging? So first, let's really talk about resiliency. We've all heard about CrowdStrike. We understand the connectedness of vendors, and CrowdStrike wasn't the first. But let's talk about resiliency and what is the wake-up call that companies have, and what are they doing to address resiliency? Michael, why don't you kick us off?
Well, resilience is a topic I'm talking about literally every day, if not several times a day. What company doesn't want to be resilient after the last 4 to 5 years with COVID-19, economic uncertainty, supply chain disruptions to, wars and conflicts? There's so much going on. And the business wants to be resilient, but the modern business is not defined by brick and mortar walls and traditional employees. The modern organization is the extended enterprise, the vendors, suppliers, outsourcers, service providers, contractors, consultants, brokers, agents, dealers, intermediaries, partners, and more. Their issues are your issues. When they have disruptions, you have disruptions. Now, of course, there's different scales because you might have a vendor, supplier that has a very minimal impact on the organization. They might be watering the plants or something in the office. Others provide critical services. You brought up CrowdStrike already. I was teaching my risk and resilience, my digital risk and resilience by design workshop in New York City last month. And one firm there told me that they do not use didn't use CrowdStrike, and you would think that they wouldn't be impacted, but a couple of their critical service providers did use the CrowdStrike, and they were down. Even though they didn't use CrowdStrike, just because their critical service providers did impacted them. Resilience is also a topic on the regulatory side. Every day I'm having conversations with EU DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, UK Operational Resilience, Australia CPS 230. And of course, there's the Basel guidance on operational resilience, and there's the US OCC guidance on operational resilience. Now, that's guidance in the United States, not regulation. And so there's a difference, but we've been told by the OCC that regulation's coming. And those regulations I just went through all impact financial services, but also the whole broader ICT community, like with EU DORA, that supports financial services. So it impacts a lot of organizations. But I'm talking to organizations throughout industries right now that are very concerned about resilience. It doesn't have to be regulated like in financial services. Talking to a global hospitality firm, a global pharmaceutical firm, a big aerospace manufacturer, all are critically focused on resilience. And that includes the extended enterprise of third-party relationships, because your business is dependent upon third parties, and you cannot be resilient without looking at the third parties and looking for where there might be single points of failure in your supply chain, to how secure are those suppliers, vendors, and things, and so much more. So much to consider there. But there's a lot we could definitely unpack.
Yeah, and Tom, you and I talked a little bit about these third parties, and Michael alluded to watering the plants. You're looking at this from a privacy and security perspective. I know you have a point of view on the plant waterers, don't you?
Yeah, and Michael hit this on the head, and this comes back to a thing called the scoping issue that we have historically in third-party risk management. And the problem that we have in this organization, problem we have in this in third-party risk circles is people are so reactionary. It's like, I got to do an assessment, just get the questionnaire out the door. What they don't do is they don't scope it appropriately. And if you're taking a look at an organization, Michael was talking about, organizations that might water the plants and things like that. But think of it from the custodial perspective, right? You get these people that are custodial firms, they're coming in, they're walking up and down the hallways, they are exposed to what's on your whiteboard. It could be your network schematics. It could be your marketing strategy. It could be mergers and acquisition data. We didn't even touch about personally identifiable information or data elements and things like that. And these people are walking around, they're sweeping the floors, they're cleaning the wastebasket, and you just happen to have some of this additional data on your desk, in spite of your clean desk policy and all that fun stuff. And so, it's about the exposure. Who's going to be exposed to your data, not necessarily just processing, who's exposed to it. And I think that's where you get a lot of issues, is people don't look at through that lens of exposure. They're like, well, they're not processing the data. Well, they're exposed to it. And all they got to do is click, and they could sell this to a competitor or somebody else on the dark web. So you're not going to hand them a questionnaire that has 800 questions, but you should be asking things about background checks. You should be asking them, do you allow them to walk around with one of these things that can take pictures? They still make an iPod. If you want to listen to music while you're working, you could still do that. And the other thing I want to hit on that Michael touched on a little bit, and we're talking about continuity and resiliency, is they historically look at it through the legacy view of if a data center was to go down, or if this line went down. Organizations seem to forget, when you look through the security lens, CIA, there's a lot of focus now on availability. It's not just confidentiality and integrity. It's about availability right now. So part of the assessment should be really focusing on the availability of that data. Yes, security and all that, confidentiality comes around it, but availability ties into how resilient you are. And I got into a conversation quite some time ago where somebody said, when they came out with the term business resilience or operational resilience, they said, oh, they're just changing the name of business continuity and disaster recovery. I said, no, they're not. If you go back in, and for instance, if you look at FFIEC Appendix J, it was brilliant in its description with respect to what do we mean by resilience? Resilience means, what do you have in place so you don't have to enact a continuity plan? So even though it's been superseded now, it's still a great document, regardless of your industry. I highly recommend anybody going out there and looking at what the Feds put out from an FFIEC Appendix J perspective.
Thank you, Tom, for that. And as long as we're talking about risk, the work in TPRM obviously is growing. When you talk about resiliency, you talk about scoping, you thinking outside of the box. And a lot of companies for a number of years pushed the concept, let's reduce the number of vendors, therefore we'll reduce our risk and we'll reduce our cost. Wondering how that's gone. What are your observations? Have they been able to reduce vendors? Michael, what are you seeing out there?
I guess there's some case studies where people have reduced some vendors, but in general, the dependence on the extended enterprise and the number of vendors is growing and growing fast. And there's a lot of ways to bypass and go around procurement and things now, and we've got a lot of like shadow third-party relationships and things like that to manage as well. It's quite complex to be able to address.
And the downside of that is what we refer to in banking as concentration risk, which is a different kind of risk. Tom, again, any thoughts on that?
Right. I've seen organizations that have this dilemma, and what it is you have to find the right balance. And there are organizations, I knew a friend of mine that had about upwards of 40 vendors, and he was tasked by his management to reduce these to less than 10. He goes, how do I do that? And I said, we have to find the balance of reducing your vendor risk. But as you reduce your vendor risk by the amount of vendors you have, your concentration risk is certainly going to go up. Now it's the proverbial of you're putting almost all your eggs in select baskets. And if anything happens to those baskets, you're going to run into problems. Now, in certain places in the world, regulators have taken concentration risk one step further, which is, okay, it's one thing if you're putting all your eggs in 1 or 2 or 5 baskets, but have you been talking with other people across the industry, your competitors, and saying, where are they putting their eggs? Mm-hmm. Now, take those eggs, are they all being processed in a certain general location? A great example of this was about 7 years ago. There was an issue where a typhoon slammed into India and took out a major ATM network through that was being used by the predominant of the big banks over in the UK. And their ATMs were practically offline for 2 whole days. Wow. And what the banking execs came out is said, okay, has anybody done their due diligence to see, oh my gosh, all of this ATM processing is being done on the west coast of India in Bangalore or Mumbai? How come nobody talked to each other? One bank talking to the next saying, for the betterment of the public, for our customers, should we, so they have access to their money, spread out where the processing is going to be? And so the regulators looking at that view of concentration risk is for the protection of the industry and the customers, and not just an individual organization. So it's best on organizations to find that balance for their own internal organization, as well as working with their neighbors across the street to say, hey, let's make sure we're doing the right thing for the industry.
That's an interesting concept of sharing information around resiliency across companies in a related industry. Very, very interesting. Let's talk about AI just for let's get started on the AI functionality. So you've done your risk assessments, you have your vendors tiered, you've got your criticals, your tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. You've been operating that way and doing your risk assessments and reviews based on that. How are you determining whether or not these vendors are using AI in their software applications and whether or not that poses a risk that you haven't assessed? What are you seeing along those lines? And Michael, again, do you want to kick us off on this?
I mean, 2 years ago, the discussion of AI didn't come up in any of my third-party risk workshops as far as the use of AI within by third parties. But ever since the Chat GPT explosion 2 years ago, it's in every one of my third-party risk workshops. And at a foundational level, I see that organizations are putting assessment questionnaires and attestations on their use of AI. Now, that's more of a legal cover your behind type exercise, just to make sure that because if something does go wrong, you can always point that, well, we asked them if they're using AI and they said they weren't, or they said they were only using it for this purposes. And what more can we do? And so it's more of a legal protection and exercise, a lot of those assessment questions and attestations around AI. But that's the foundational level that I'm seeing.
Okay. And what about contract language? Is there anything you're seeing emerge in terms of contract language around AI?
Yeah, I mean, some are restricting AI in third-party relationships, but most often it's getting it approved and documented. So it's extending AI governance, like what you have with the EU AI Act, but also like in the US, you have the NAIC, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, the AI Model Audit Rule, which really requires AI governance within insurance companies. But you're seeing that type of mentality covered within third-party contracts and relationships to document the use cases for AI and get approval for it.
Super. I'm going to ask you a couple questions. I know you're working with some clients who are struggling to figure out, are their contracts adequately written to address the use of AI? How are we at 4C Risk addressing this challenge?
Yeah, I think the way to look at this is AI has come a long way, and I think we are ready for that position where AI can do a lot of work for us. AI's ability to work with large volumes of data and analyzing, interpreting, and identifying patterns is making it a code enabler to do more with less, and that too in less time. We can actually take, in some of the scenarios, we are seeing that there are standard clauses that exist on one side that organizations keep enhancing. For example, with AI coming into play, these AI clauses are getting incorporated into the standard clauses. Now at scale, we can assess hundreds and thousands of contracts to see where there are deviations, where there are gaps. And as part of annual reviews, give organizations ability to address those gaps with the in those contracts. So that's one of the interesting use cases that's coming out.
Mm-hmm. Michael, I know you've been an advocate of AI for reading documents. I think you've made some comments on your GRC 2020. What are your thoughts about the use of AI for reading documents or other functionality?
Oh, I'm an advocate for AI. AI has to be properly governed. But in the reckless use of AI is extremely dangerous. Use AI in the hands of a novice can be dangerous. AI in the hands of a subject matter expert that is lazy can be a concern. But AI in the hands of a skilled, dedicated subject matter expert should be able to extend that subject matter expertise and get more done. I mean, natural language processing and reading documents is amazing. I mean, I'm told that if you print off the United Kingdom's FCA rulebook, the Financial Conduct Authority, it's a stack of paper 6 feet tall. I haven't put my printer through that. I'm not going to test that, but I've been told that a few times. You print off the US Code of Federal Regulations and stack it end to end, it's longer than a marathon. You know, how long would it take you to read that regulation? And that's not even counting the enforcement actions and all the supplemental material and all that stuff around that. I mean, a long time, a year or more. I mean, that's a lot of paper. A machine can like read it, and not only read it, but map it and organize it in a matter of minutes. And that's amazing. Now, on top of that, I was working with the chief ethics and compliance officer at a life sciences firm in the United Kingdom. And their internal testing of natural language processing for regulatory change, not only is it a gazillion times faster, they said it was 30% more accurate. Because you think about it, you know, if we had a big stack of legal and regulatory compliance documents, our mind's going to wander and think, you know, what are the dinner plans tonight? You know, what are we doing this weekend? What's our next trip? And things get missed, but a machine's mind stays on task. But it does need subject matter expert review. And so in the hands of a skilled subject matter expert, I think AI is extremely powerful. And that's just one element of like when you mentioned reading documents. So NLP comes to mind there. And then we can talk about generative AI, machine learning, and predictive analytics, and all these other aspects too.
Great. Tom, any thoughts on the InfoSec point of view with regard to the risk assessment process and perhaps the approach that some companies are taking, pros and cons?
Absolutely. First off, you know, every organization, if you don't have this by now, this should be part of your contractual language, which is called either a DSA, Data Security Addendum, or DPSA, Data Privacy and Security Addendum. And what that is that's an actual addendum that goes to the MSA, the Master Services Agreement, actually explaining and spelling out in legal language, these are our obligations. These are your obligations to make sure you're in alignment with our security and privacy practices and tolerances. And one of those now should be talking about the use of AI tools. How are you using them? From a third-party risk perspective, I would highly recommend that, you know, assessors, auditors, go and take a look at process flow diagrams. Go take a look at network diagrams. You know, we used to look at these things and say, show me where our customer data is on the network. Where's our systems? Where's the firewall locations? How are the routers configured? Now you're not only asking that, if the question comes back, yes, we are using AI systems, show me where the AR systems are. Are the AR systems being used in production? Are the AR systems being in tested and QA environments? How are they locked down? What are the controls around them? Who manages them? Access. Who has the ability? I mean, the last thing anybody wants is having somebody's confidential data floating out there on the public web due to misconfigurations. So you have to have an understanding of the operations and all the ramifications that can come with it. So those are the two big pluses. First, get it in a contract. You need to know, are they using it and how they're using it. You can stipulate and say, my data is not to go through an AI tool. If they are going to use it, you want to make sure you have that understanding. And as Michael said earlier, you understand the ramifications of it. But through the lens of an auditor, the lens of an assessor, you got it. You want to be able to visualize this. You want to be able to see it and point out and see where those points of entry can be, or any type of potential data exfiltration.
So Michael and Tom and Supra, you know, this use of AI by vendors in their software applications, this is all a new learning journey for a lot of companies. So we speak to companies all the time, and they're still trying to figure out the difference between, you know, ChatGPT and curated models. Can we look to frameworks to help us kind of organize and assess some of these risks? Tom, right back to you. What are some of the frameworks that are most often leveraged for third-party risk management? And what are the pros and cons with some of the frameworks?
What's shameful is when we talk about frameworks, it usually comes down to organizations saying, I'm the bigger dog in this fight. You're going to use my framework. Okay. And it's a bit, this is why I see online, I used to respond to these and I just stopped doing it on LinkedIn, where people are coming out going, third-party risk is broken, or this is broken, or this is, and sometimes I look at this and I'm like, this is coming from a CISO, and third-party risk aligns with the CISO. How come you're not asking the questions? Why aren't you talking to your team, talking about due diligence? Okay, don't complain about the, everybody else's house if you can't keep your own house in order. So when you start looking at things like this, frameworks are great. I'm a big fan, always have been, of shared assessments. And the reason for that is because these are organizations coming together to address these challenges. They've addressed AI, and what do we should be looking for? What are the questions we should be asking for AI? And the beauty of that framework is it's in alignment with over a dozen other guidance points ranging from NIST or ISO or FCA guidance, FFIEC, etc., to other global standards, because it's member driven, and the members tell them, hey, we have operations in Hong Kong, we need to be in line with this, or we have operations in Germany, we need to be in line with this. And that's what they do. But this goes back to a question we had earlier, where if you have an organization over in Europe and you say, well, you need to be in alignment with NIST, we don't use NIST over here. NIST doesn't apply to my country. NIST, the only thing, if we talk PII, that we have to worry about is GDPR. Okay. So you have to make sure that when you're going to be scoping these things appropriately, you understand the jurisdictions and the operations of where that said vendor is. And then, of course, and folks, please listen to me. When you start talking about intercontinental data transfer, please make sure you're working with appropriate legal professionals that understand privacy, or your privacy organizations. This is something you don't want to get into if you are not schooled in privacy law and best privacy practices.
Michael, thank you, Tom. Michael, what about some of the frameworks that you're seeing adopted, pros and cons?
Well, I mean, my perspective is very broad. And so I'm having a lot of interaction, particularly in Europe, on this. And there's a number of RFPs around third-party risk I'm interacting across Europe, from large global pharmaceutical firms to automobile manufacturers, and to hospitality firms, and of course, many banks, particularly when you tie in DORA and things. But the EU DORA is a huge concern within the financial services and the communities and companies supporting financial services. But the one that I'm seeing a lot of shift right now is the EU CSDDD, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which ties into the EU CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Now, this is all ESG focus and broad ESG across many aspects of the environment, to the social aspects and the governance of the organization. But I'm working with a number of firms right now that are building very broad, third-party risk strategies right now, because they got to bring all this together, and they have a lot of silos of third-party risk oversight, because information security has gone in one direction, and bribery and corruption has gone in a different directions, and sanctions has gone another direction, and the environment and climate change has gone another directions, and the PFAS and forever chemicals, and the human rights and modern slavery and things. Everything's been handled as these siloed little projects in third parties. And organizations are looking at the EU CSDDD and how it ties into EU CSRD and the significant ramifications of the global impact on fines in this area. And they're looking and saying, we need a comprehensive third-party risk program that covers all these different domains in a common framework. So I'm seeing a lot of focus on the ESG related frameworks and stuff because of the EU CSDDD specifically. Before that, Germany's LKSG, the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, and all the little pieces that pour into these.
Wow. That's really interesting. So it looks like over in Europe, at least, they're trying to break down the silos across an organization where certain business units are concerned with certain risks around vendors, HR, privacy, sustainability. All of these are risks to a company. And it sounds to me that they're trying to pull this together into a comprehensive framework. Is that how I should interpret your comments?
Yep. The other challenge we have is layers, because a lot of these organizations, and with third-party relationships, we don't just assess the relationship, but the components in the relationship. Whether it's, you know, the contracts and service level agreements within financial services firms or the facilities supporting us in manufacturing or retail, or whatever it is. I sat on the Social Accountability Advisory Board for a major global brand, dealing with supply chain code of conduct with international labor standards like child labor, forced labor, working hours, wage and hour, and health and safety across 5,000 suppliers, but 20,000 facilities. One supplier might have one facility, another supplier might have 20 facilities. And they did assessments and evaluations at the facility level, which rolled up to an overall supplier score on social accountability risks, the S in ESG, and from that perspective. So we don't just assess the relationship level, we have to assess the component level below these relationships as well. And it gets quite complex when you go into things like conflict minerals and other things that require you to trace tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold all the way to the source smelter in mine to determine if it comes from the Democratic Republic of the Congo or 9 surrounding countries known for crimes against humanity. It gets really complex as you have to start going through the layers of this. So not just the facilities within the supplier that supports us, but, you know, even tracing materials and minerals and stuff all the way down to the source smelter and mine. I mean, there's a lot of complexity what organizations have to deal with now.
Wow. Super. Thank you for that, Michael. What about from a US perspective? What are you seeing as the readily adopted framework in some of the interactions you have, Supra?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I want to underscore what Michael and Tom mentioned. There are multiple frameworks out there, multiple guidances when it comes to third-party risk management. We have EU DORA, TBRM requirements, ISO, FFIEC, NIST, and so on, right? I think the key is for organizations to enhance their risks and controls framework to incorporate organization-specific focus areas and also incorporate the guidances that are available from multiple frameworks. I often see that NIST is a widely accepted framework when it comes to cybersecurity and cybersecurity point of view. There are publications such as 837, 853, 800-161, CSF, and name it. Actually, there are so many frameworks that have been outlined. By enhancing your own risks and controls structure that is mapped to these multiple frameworks, it provides a structured approach to managing the supply chain risk management process. In fact, federal agencies are required to comply with these standards. Federal agencies like federal laws like FISMA requires institutions to comply with NIST standards, for example. And another benefit is that since these guidances are, or since these agencies are, some of these agencies are part of US Department of Commerce, it does act very quickly whenever there is a presidential order, for example, or whenever there's a regulatory update. So those are updated, and quickly mapping your risk framework to those guidances allows you to stay on top of those changes.
So it is sounding like it's getting a lot more complicated. The number of vendors is not going down. We're starting to see new vendors who are AI kind of vendors. So this is a whole new wrinkle into the workload. And what I'm hearing from software companies, I was just at ISOCII not too long ago, the amount of time and effort to onboard vendors and to continue to risk assess vendors on an annual basis is turning from a few months to up to 12 months to go through this process in companies. I know that sounds crazy, but when I listen to Michael's, you know, on all the frameworks and the views and looking at a vendor across the, you know, multiple lenses, I guess I'm not so surprised to hear that. As we start thinking about businesses still need to get their work done. And if they have to spend 12 months or 6 months onboarding a vendor or assessing a vendor before they can explore a new avenue of business, I mean, I think the implications are really quite significant. So I want to talk about technology a little bit because, you know, we are here to share a little bit about that. But what are you seeing, you know, first of all, are you Do you guys agree? Are you seeing these longer due diligence processes? Is this being raised, Michael, in the workshops that you're conducting as a business risk? I mean, I know we're talking about vendor risk, but I'm going to flip it upside down and say, isn't this a business risk now?
Yeah, it is definitely a business risk, and because we need our extended enterprise, we need our third-party relationships, and if things get hung up too much within the procurement due diligence process, it limits our agility in the market and ability to leverage the extended enterprise. But on the flip side, we also don't want to introduce risk, so we need our proper due diligence. Now, typically, I've seen that to onboard a third party, the average is about 20 hours spent. Now, some complex relationships takes hundreds of hours, some just take a few hours. But you automate that with a lot of the third party risk solutions. We're not even talking AI at this point, and that go down to about 5 hours of time. You can get to see a 75% savings in general. But that's significant when you multiply that out by the number of third parties being onboarded and things. But again, some of this, the 20 hours on average to onboard in manual processes is an average that I've calculated across a lot of research interviews. But again, some are hundreds of hours. And I've just had my one experience this year myself trying to be onboarded by a global professional services firm that, just a company of one myself, I've spent easily more than 20 hours in their onboarding process, just myself responding to questions and all this stuff. And I'm just a company of one. That's insane.
So super, any thoughts about technology and how AI can help with this problem?
Yeah, I think the leverage of technology is key for us to compress this whole time that it takes to onboard third parties and onboard vendors. And the key is that we know AI can do a lot of work. While it is exciting that AI can help accelerate many of the third-party risk management areas, I think it's also important for us to understand how this is getting applied to the third-party management use cases. I think it's important to be careful a little bit more here as we start thinking about leveraging ChatGPT, large language models, small language models, and so on. I think we all are familiar that large language models do introduce privacy risk, for example, whereas small language models are designed specifically to perform these specific risk and compliance management tasks. These can be deployed on client environments easily. In fact, individual tenants on a multi-tenant environment also can operate with these small language models. It's also important to understand that these vendors or solutions where AI is in place or technology is in place, are they using your data to train their language models? So that's another aspect to be kept in mind. And while automation is great, while reducing the time and all is great, it's important to understand if there is a human in the loop process enabled with the right subject matter experts to be able to handle this problem statement.
Tom, talk a little bit about SOC 2 documents and how they're being used, and you do see more emphasis on SOC 2 documents as you're starting to look at vendor risk?
Well, it can go both ways. I think what organizations are doing with the SOC 2, and I know I'm going to get pushback from people that are in the in the CPA world when I bring this up, but unfortunately, a lot of organizations are using SOC 2s and getting SOC 2s as more of a marketing ploy than actual evidence of this is how our controls are. Okay, I've seen it, I've heard it, literally by organizations themselves. And well, why are you spending six figures on getting a SOC 2? Because I was told we need it. It's going to help sell our service. And then what happens is you get third-party risk professionals that look at SOC 2 and incorrectly interpret getting a SOC 2 and looking at it as, we're done, our assessment's over. No. You talk to any regulator, they will tell you you have to go beyond a SOC 2 report. Yes, it's an independent attestation, but you need to make sure, based on your scope of work, based on the data and all of these other components, that is fully covered within the assessment. Now, that's not all going to be covered in a SOC 2. So that's why you would have to do this additional due diligence. And I feel the pain of a lot of people out there. I was one of them with respect to, how long should an assessment take? Okay. A lot of this is self-induced. Companies pull this on themselves. And if you break down the word due diligence, that's what this is. This is a due diligence activity. You're not doing a full-blown audit. You're not going in there looking for zero assurance, or it's not going to happen. If you're going to invest in an investment, good luck trying to get on the phone and calling the CEO or the CFO saying, I want to talk about your upcoming strategy and what are your earnings expectations. They're not going to tell you unless you have a mutual fund that you manage. They're not going to talk to you. And that's where you get a lot of these organizations that are like going, I am ABC Bank. I'm one of the top 5 banks. How dare you ask me these questions? No, I am going to ask you these questions, because if I don't, and I'm a regulated industry, I'm going to get hit. Number 2, you should be aware of this because you're under the same auspices as me. And so let's bring this all together. So how do we make this easier? First off, we got to focus on our processes. Companies are so reactionary. Third-party risk teams are so reactionary. They don't take the time to sit back and go, what is in the best interest of the overall entity and of the business? And as we're hearing from all of these things, up to a year is ridiculous. There is a point of diminishing returns. Okay, there really is. And this is where organizations need to be in alignment. What is sourcing and procurement's role? What is legal's role? What is third-party risk management's role? What is IT operations role? On and on and on. It's just like following a diagram. It's just like following a flow chart, a Gantt chart. When this stops, this goes, and on and on and on. So we should have a respective time frame. AI absolutely is going to help alleviate a lot of these processes. I think one of the biggest cries that I've heard from my third-party brethren is, are you afraid that AI is going to take our jobs? No, there's always going to be a human element to this. AI, to me, my vision, it's a glorified decision support system. You still need somebody on the other end that has to sign off on the risk. You can't say, oh, ChatGPT told me it's okay. Okay, there's going to be an individual within the organization that has to sign off on it. So, through the cyber lens, through the operations lens, whoever that is, somebody has to own the risk. It's always going to be the business. We're there not to impede the business from doing what they do best, which is making money for the organization, but we're there to make sure that they align to the guardrails and they follow the track that they're supposed to be, and we make sure that they're in alignment with our risk tolerance.
Thank you, Tom. Super. I'm going to ask you to bring up your system. And while you're making that, I want to just kind of summarize here. So we have the frameworks. We know they're valuable. They're emerging. They're becoming more, the breadth of the frameworks, particularly in Europe, are becoming broader to address risks across the enterprise. We know it's interconnected risk. We have the frameworks to guide us. We have a lot of documents that we need to look at. Some of them may be SOC 2s. We have our own risks that we manage to, and we bring that information together in a way that can start to leverage technology. And Supra, do you want to show us a few, go through a little bit about what we're doing over here at Foresee Risk to begin to address the volume of data and the tremendous amount of documentation that we have in front of us, and how we're able to start looking at that. And maybe you want to share a little bit about some of the thoughts that we have here in our company around that topic.
Absolutely. And Yo, if you could give me the presentation rights, then I'll go ahead and share. Yeah, while Yo is giving me the presentation rights, I did want to mention that I really like what Tom mentioned. We have to be able to go beyond SOC 2. We can't restrict ourselves to just a SOC 2 report, and also beyond third parties, because there is reliance on third parties vendors, and there are fourth parties, fifth parties. To be able to reach to that stage in a fastest possible way is the key for us to be able to handle the kind of risks that we see in third-party risk management space. Now, FORSI risk solutions are designed really to help organizations assess the design efficacy of their compliance artifacts. It helps them get a handle on all their obligations that they have when it comes to third-party risk management process, and then see where do they have coverage in the vendor artifacts. We all know when we onboard third parties, we are looking at their SOC 2 report, their policies and procedures, and assessing those against our risks and controls that we have from a third party point of view. What you're seeing here is a visual representation of an organization's third party risk assessment criteria on the left hand side, compared to a SOC 2 report, just a SOC 2 report in this case. In fact, this right side can be extended to include policies and procedures, their operational procedures, to be able to compare against the third-party risk assessment criteria. Interestingly, what you see here is there are many cards, there are many lines that are crossing over, but AI, what it has done here is it has identified my risk assessment criteria, my company's risk assessment criteria, in the vendor's SOC 2 report, in their policies and procedures, to understand if I have coverage, if that coverage exists in their documentation. Wherever you see these green nodes, it signifies that AI was able to identify a strong correlation for that particular risk assessment criteria in the SOC 2 report or in the policies and procedures. Wherever you see these yellow nodes, it signifies that the threshold was not met for the criteria. Therefore, subject matter experts should review this further. And there is a risk appetite. There is a risk tolerance level that organization has, and then see if that risk tolerance level can be applied here to accept this or to acknowledge this, understand this risk. More importantly, with just a click of a button, within few seconds, now AI is showing you these gaps, these red nodes that are not covered at all in the SOC 2 report. The detailed documentation, the detailed criteria, and the mapping of that criteria to organizations' SOC 2 report or to vendor SOC 2 report and their compliance artifacts is all presented to the user on the screen. And then clearly the gaps are captured here so that users can do something about those gaps when it comes to that vendor's assessment. Now, subject matter experts can easily select these areas, these gaps, and then ask AI or ask ARIA here in this case to help them to understand what can be done about these gaps that exist in the artifacts. There is a human in the loop as ARIA is providing recommendations here. Here is an example of recommendation that ARIA provided. This is the third-party assessment criteria that the company has to verify that the penetration tests are aligned with the organization's security policies. And now ARIA is providing a recommendation from third-party point of view as to what the company can do. Now, there's of course a subject matter expert in the loop here. Whatever you're seeing on the screen here, from compliance artifacts point of view, from third-party risk management artifacts point of view, and assessment point of view, everything is getting done within a matter of few minutes, actually. Right? You just push a button and then AI parses this information, organizes this information, and starts to create this mapping. The subject matter expert really goes in and then starts reviewing the details. That's that 20% of the work. 80% of the work is done by AI, but 20% of the work is where subject matter experts go in to review what has been mapped and then give a thumbs up that it indeed makes sense. Now, all this information can be extracted into simple Excel files, right? So this information, the entire package of assessment is available here. What is mapped strong, what is mapped partial, what is not mapped, including the control objectives that were laid out by the organization, and which SOC 2 report, which policies and procedures are mapped here, including the match criteria here, whether it is a strong match, partial match, or a low match. Right? Now, this is just one type of assessment that I'm just showing here. This compliance mapping capability is so powerful that we use this to assess standard contract clauses in thousands of contracts to assess if those contract clauses are included in the organization's or in the contracts that exist with existing vendors, to see if there are any gaps and give them the ability to address those gaps. Now, while all this is happening, you must be thinking, how do I get all these data into a structured format? How do I make sure that my third-party risk assessment criteria is staying up to date with the standards and publications that are out there? So the platform itself gives you the ability to create a rules inventory. There is a regulatory research database that has information from over 2,300 sources. System gives you the ability at the click of a button to extract all this information into a rules inventory. Once the information is extracted into a rules inventory, assess that using the same compliance map capability against your control objectives to see if there are gaps. And if there are gaps, ARIA comes back and provides you the recommendation, letting you know what you can do to enhance your risk and control framework. As I was mentioning, there are many frameworks that are out there, right? So these are EU, DORA, NIST, federal regulations that are out there. But the key is to keep enhancing your control framework to ensure that this control framework is incorporating guidances and updates from the regulatory agencies. Now, interestingly, what platform does is, while all this information is getting collected, whether these are regulatory requirements, guidances, compliance mapping that is done against the vendor artifacts, or the vendor artifacts uploaded into a system, there is a closed domain knowledge base that is getting created in the application. This is Ask ARIA Copilot, where in addition to answering the questions in your third-party risk assessment questionnaire, now you can start asking questions through ARIA right here, actually. And ARIA immediately gets back to you with a response. In this case, I'm asking a simple question, as in, what is the importance of monitoring and logging access events in access control and authentication practices? ARIA immediately looked at the details. It provided a response just like a human. It is looking through thousands of policies, hundreds of vendor artifacts, and it's now formulating a response for the subject matter expert, letting them know this is what it means. And by the way, it's also pointing to the vendor's artifact, whether it's a SOC 2 report or their own policy or procedure, it's pointing to that particular document where the information is contained. And not just that, when the user clicks on that artifact, it actually takes the user to that section or subsection where the information is contained. Now, imagine doing all this with just PDF documents, with just Excel files, or with just questionnaires. That's where it takes a lot of time. And then we are trying to compress all of that to do within a matter of few minutes and few days rather than months here.
Well, Supra, thank you for that. This is very interesting. So the point being is there is a lot of work to do. AI has forced us to do new risk assessments, create, as you said, Michael, new contract language. But AI can also be on the flip side of this and provide some help to go through all of these documents and act as a member of the team, however, with a lot more speed and accuracy than the human being. So as we're going to close our time today, I just wondered if, as you're thinking about this, Michael and Tom, and seeing what AI is able to do, what are your kind of closing thoughts of the world in front of us with AI forcing us to do more work and leveraging the work for us? Michael?
Repeat that question once more, that end part.
Yeah, sorry. I was just wondering, as you're thinking about how Supra showed these use cases around AI, are there any other things that come to your mind, particularly troublesome or time-consuming work, where maybe this could come into play?
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's the aggregation of a lot of third-party risk intelligence data from all the different databases and like those persons, watch lists, sanction lists, negative news, reputation and brand, ESG ratings, financial ratings. I mean, organizations have all these scattered little silos of information that AI could leverage. But then the other piece is the use of AI to fill in, third-party risk assessments. Should still have subject matter expert review and editing, but if AI can do 80% of the work, we can get more done, as you guys have referenced. But then also comparing documents and things too, as you guys have talked about, it comes up. You have here's my policy, like my IT security policy, in Tom's case, and here's the vendor's IT security policy. What's the difference? Oh, their encryption's weaker. Oh, their password's weaker, or whatever it might be, and be able to look at that.
Excellent. Tom, thank you, Michael. Tom, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think this is a big help to the third-party risk industry. I believe it's going to be able to have it's going to be a gold mine for us to be able to do analysis at a much faster pace. We already talked about comparing, policies to our policies, and this questionnaire to that, to our master questionnaire, whatnot. But you're also able to bring in additional tools into the AI tool, such as continuous monitoring. You have so many continuous monitoring tools out there. That's one thing that certainly we have to do actively in the financial services industry, as well as healthcare and other ones. You need to stay on top of the cybersecurity posture of not just your third parties, but your nth parties, your downstreamers. And the only way you could really do that actively is by utilizing artificial intelligence to be able to help pull that information to you and be able to present it to, say, me and my team, to be able to analyze and take a look at it and go, okay, we saw something here. Do I need to follow up directly with this with the vendor? Where's my risk tolerance? Is it something I need to take to the business unit? Something I need to take to legal and say, hey, they could be, we could be running into a situation here of either a breach of contract or, this is something, and it doesn't even have to be cyber related, right? Michael even mentioned, it just taking all this business information.
Right.
When I actually saw this scenario where we assessed a vendor and they were entering into a 3-year agreement, and then all of a sudden there's on the PR Newswire and in CNBC that they were talks of merging, and it's like, holy cow, who's going to buy them out? Is it one of our competitors? Now what are we going to do?
Right.
How do we get our data back? And all this other stuff. So it's really helpful to be able to have those tools and to be able to assess that information. Now the question is who's going to be responsible for going through all that information? Now that's a preview of coming attractions. Is it third party? Is it going to be sourcing and procurement? Is so much of that going to be thrown at the first line of defense, the business unit who's responsible for that? Mm-hmm. That's what keeps us gainfully employed. And I think that's what's going to be the fun of all this, is helping us sitting at the table over, who should be taking this on, and we'll sort that out at the corporate level.
Well, we are very excited about where AI, particularly AI that's trained on small language models, small enough to fit behind your 4 walls and be contained around your security requirements, not going out to the World Wide Web. So we're excited about what we're doing. We appreciate, Michael and Tom, your thoughts today, and also the input that you've given us over the years. As we've come to market with this set of products, your thoughts and your insights have been tremendously valuable. I'm going to go back to Yo for any closing remarks. Yo, over to you.
Yes, I have a question here about ChatGPT and whether or not large language models are used in any way, public information in the demonstration that Super gave.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think it's a great question. I think given where we are, the world of compliance and risk, I would strongly recommend that we stay away from large language models in a way that large language models are, they are designed for a certain purpose. They do a wonderful job. In fact, they can solve all hunger problem, in my opinion. I'd say that in a certain way, but it means that it can do anything pretty much. But because of the nature how those are designed, it also starts looking at what questions you are asking, what documentation you are trying to read, and all of that infringes on your privacy. This information starts to now go out of your 4 walls. This is where small languages come into play. We have heard Apple talk about it. We have heard NVIDIA talk about it. We have seen leaders talk about it. Small language is the future. Small language models are the future, actually, because these are specified for specific tasks. These are designed for specific tasks. And 4 Series solutions are really designed on small language models. We, in fact, took the step earlier on to build small language models, didn't realize that we were actually building small language models. But then as this large language models and everything started coming into play, it was a no-brainer that what we were doing were, in fact, indeed, the small language model approach.
So the question was, are we using ChatGPT? And the
No,
answer
not
is
at all.
no.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure you had an
Yeah,
opportunity
absolutely,
to
Oh,
emphasize that answer.
Closed domain, private, secured,
Domain small
small
language
language.
models curated
Okay.
on risk and compliance, corpora.
And
Yes.
you're saying that that's really how enterprises are going to be using AI for risk and compliance and very specialized tasks, is to make sure that
Yes.
these are very closed.
Yeah,
So
that's
that,
the future. That's where we
yeah.
all are headed. If you're not seeing it already, we will start seeing it. Yeah.
Right, right. And Tom and Michael, do you have any comments on that as well? Are you in agreement?
Yeah.
Sir, go ahead, Michael.
No, I said thumbs up.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it's all about you don't want your stuff going out there on the public. Nobody wants that. I mean, I don't have to. We talked about this in a previous call, everybody, but all you got to do is go take a look at what happened with Samsung and ChatGPT and some of their
Exactly.
engineers. That's
Yeah.
the biggest nightmare that any organization could go through.
Exactly.
Awful situation.
Don't
Well,
let
I
thank
that.
think we have one room for one more quick question. On the demonstration super, you said that this comparison and shredding and parsing of information could go from months to minutes and days, actually. But that's just part of the TPM process. So the question is, with AI, how much efficiency can be gained in the onboarding process, which Susan brought up it's not in the question, but
Takes a
Susan
long
brought up
time.
is going on to 12 months. So what do you envision the use of AI tools like what you demonstrated doing to that 12-month window? How much can that be compressed?
Yeah, we are actually thinking about here. We have done ROI analysis actually for some of our customers where we are doing the implementation. We are seeing 10x, 9x volumes of improvements already as with AI. The interesting
So
part
1
here is
month instead of 10 months.
exactly. And then
by the way,
what happens here is that the AI can do the work very fast, actually. It can, in fact, do the work in minutes, but subject matter experts still do have to do that work. So that due diligence or that work takes a little bit of time. And then overall lapse time is still 10x improvements when we talk about compressing the timelines.
And when we're talking about onboarding, it's not just the due diligence questionnaire, which is certainly part of it, but it's also the contracting, which
Right.
again, there's a lot.
That wasn't part of the question. The contracting is probably the biggest bigaboo, right? The biggest part of it.
Time.
Okay, I just want to say thank you, everyone, our wonderful panelists. Great discussion and great, unveiling of how AI can really compress life cycles and also help third-party teams really get to that analysis where they're using their real skill. So thank you and good evening, or have a wonderful rest of the day for you that are in North America. And please take a moment to fill out the survey. You'll get an email reminder on that. It helps us make our webinar series better. And we're just delighted to have you with us.
And I want to encourage all of you to watch Tom on the LinkedIn tidbits and Michael, who posts amazing thought leadership on his LinkedIn and GRC 2020 report. So thank you to our experts on the call today. Supra, to you, and Yo, thank you so much for pulling this together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Bye.
Have a nice
Bye-bye.
weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.